Hello. Hi, sweetie. Hello. Hi there.
Hello?
Hi, nice to see you. Hi, welcome.
Is it just me, Lorna?
Yes, it's just you and I.
Oh, so why are we on Zoom?
Because I'm still broadcasting it.
Oh,
So
I
it's
didn't know that.
still
Are
going.
we on? Are we being recorded now?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know we were being broadcast.
Yeah. No, it's continues to be Tuesday tonic.
Right.
So but it was meant to be just a informal talk. So I'm going to just kind of introduce it and let people know what is going on, and then we'll get into it. And
So it'll be for an hour again?
It may be less. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to say, for people who are watching this video later on, welcome. Normally we do an hour on a Tuesday at 3, and it's intended to be a group discussion or a group conversation around particular topics. And the last few weeks, inevitably, we've been talking about COVID and what the world might look like post-COVID-19. And the theme or the topic for today is pretty much the same, but with a specific focus around, as the title shows, race, white privilege and accountability. And it comes in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd in the US. And it got me thinking again about the future. And there are moments in time where amazing things happen to trigger us to rethink and to revisit the nature of the world and the societies in which we live. So I wanted to kind of use that as a focus for the conversation or the discussion today. And it's Francis and I wanted to treat it more as an informal chat rather than a huge panel discussion. So hope that's okay. So as I said, that's for anybody who's coming into this later on. So where I want to start is just to say that it's just over a week ago now since we saw the image of a white police officer kneeling on the neck of a Black African-American person in the US. So this person is lying prone, his hands are cuffed behind his back. And I understand that there were certainly at least 2 other police officers holding him down. And then this particular police officer had his knee on the back of his neck. And you could hear the guy saying, "I can't breathe." You can see people filming, obviously, and you can also see the police officer with the knee on his neck. And it really struck me as quite an audacious thing for this person to do. The police officer is there. He's not, well, he can't be oblivious to the fact that there are cameras on him. And yet it made little difference to him, to the fact that he actually didn't stop, his behavior didn't stop. And it got me thinking about what kind of behavior is that? What is it about this person or this society or the world in which we're living at the moment that made him think it was okay, even though he's being recorded, it was okay for him to do this, for him to carry on and behave in this kind of really what I feel is a very inhuman way. And thinking about it and visiting it, my mind also went to a song, and I want to just switch for a minute and share my screen and play a little bit of the song. I don't know what YouTube's rules are regarding copyright, so I'm only going to do a little bit of the song, but I hope it kind of says something about the words that we've been talking about. So let me just cue it and find it. Let me just try and go back to it a minute. Bear with me. So let me find my screen, share. There we go. Let's see if that works. So, can you hear it?
Yeah.
We'll believe in freedom, not arrest. Hear me talking to you. We'll believe in freedom, and not arrest until the killing of black men, black mothers, sons is as important as the killing of white men. White mother sons, do you believe in freedom and not arrest? Sing it with me if you like it. We who believe in freedom and not arrest until
I'm going to pause it there. And the song was written by Bernice Reagan Johnson, or Johnson Reagan, Bernice Johnson Reagan. She's one of the founding members of Sweet Honey in the Rock, and that was the group you were watching there. And she was singing this song, or she penned this song back in the 1980s. And the song was a celebration of someone called Ella Jo Baker, who was instrumental in the civil rights movement in the 1960s and just slightly beyond. And it got me thinking, so nearly half a century after the civil rights movement, or certainly more than half a century, and 40 years since Bernice Johnson Reagan wrote that song, we've still got a situation where an individual, because of the color of his skin, loses his life. And those words just made me feel absolutely saddened and disheartened and quite disturbed in a lot of way, until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. That says something really profound to me. And as I'm saying it now, I'm feeling kind of quite emotional about it. Because after all these years, the question for me then became, well, what has changed? What's different now? What has happened? Why is it that we're still in this situation where we can have somebody on the streets of a major city in the 21st century is treated like an animal and later on lose their life? What is that about? And so what I'm hoping, Francis, is you and I can just have a chew the fat or chew the breeze, or whatever the phrase is, and just have a conversation about it. And also I've got some thoughts I wanted to kind of bring out in the course of the conversation. So let me pause there and hear what your thoughts are and what your take on it is so far, Francis.
Well, obviously, it was an extremely shocking thing to see. In some ways, maybe it should, but it kind of didn't almost surprise me. Because that's how I've seen things happening in America. Not to say it doesn't happen in other parts of the world, but in America, it just seems to be somewhere where, and yet you can see lots of, black role models and people who've become very famous and very rich. You do have that. But then on the other scale, there's people and they're like an underclass. Now, it wouldn't just be black people like that. There will be white people like that, and there'll be, as they call them, Hispanics. But there does seem to be this definite, particularly, I don't know whether it's just black men. It probably isn't, but those are the kind of stories you hear. And it's like, well, yeah, you had all that civil rights in the 60s going on, and there was segregation on, I mean, I can't believe really, I mean, I'm glad I wasn't there at the time, although I was alive at the time. I can't believe even to this day it was allowed, but it was very, very, and where did that come from? Because America is a melting pot. The indigenous population were sort of the Indian population. So everyone there really is an immigrant from all over the world. So how is it then that black people, especially, I think probably more black men, I don't know, seem to be like an underclass? I really don't get that. And I don't get that since the 60s, nothing seems to have changed. I mean, we did have President Obama, and he did a lot of good things, and it's amazing that he got to be where he is, because normally, well, I think still presidents, it's how much money you've got and how much power and influence you've got. So he was very, how he got there, I don't really know, but he did, and he was a good man. Well, he is a good man. And then you've got the other extreme now, haven't Trump, and he's not even like a president. He's not even a leader that you'd say, well, I don't like his politics, but at least he acts like a politician or a leader. But because he doesn't, he acts like someone in a backstreet bar, calling people jerks, and obviously his whole attitude towards what's happened. So it doesn't surprise me it's happened, because it's happened so many times. Now what's happening is he's holed up in the White House, and there's people. I mean, it's almost like another revolution. And why did it have to happen? And
I think that's the big question for me then is, why did it happen? Yes, that's a question. But how is it permissible? How is it possible that someone can think, after Rodney King and all the rest of it, all the people who have died over the years, how is it that someone thinks it's okay to do that? Now, I guess my questions are about, well, is it because, and I'm going to, because last week we had Sharif Abdullah on, Tuesday Tonic, sharing his thoughts on the notion of a world that works for all. And in his reflections, it struck me that there was something here about what he called invisible cultures, that there's a kind of ways of being, of values, beliefs, norms that people hold that are below the surface, that may not be absolutely apparent to others, but that inform behaviors and thinking, that informs how people act. And so one of the things I've been thinking about, is it to do with invisible culture? Is it possible that this person or these officers are operating from that sphere, from a sense of invisible cultures? Are they operating from a sense of what it means to have privilege, and white privilege in particular, that almost as if anything is possible, nothing is going to happen to me, there is no accountability here? And it reminds me, for example, and I know I'm shifting a little bit here, but it reminded me of this week in the UK with Dominic Cummings, or last week, round about the same time as George was losing his life, that Dominic Cummings who's one, for those who may be watching outside the UK, is one of the UK government's advisors. Now, he was instrumental, or played a significant role in creating the lockdown policies in the UK. And yet he flouted those policies. He was able to drive 260 miles at a time when people were told they cannot leave their homes for any reason. And he gives all sorts of excuses for why he did it. But at no point does he apologize. At no point does he say, yes, I was wrong, I'm completely out of order in doing this, and I hold my hands up. His excuses seem to be, it was, my wife, my eyes, I was testing my eyes, I wanted to make sure I was well. And then he's also supported by the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in his excuses. So there's something here for me about, is it to do with notions of invisible culture? The idea that somehow some mores, some mores, some norms, some values, some beliefs drive people to behave in certain ways? Is it to do with notions of white privilege, where some people who look a certain way, who can fit in, see themselves as distinctly different from everybody else, and therefore don't have to be accountable for their behaviors? Is that what's going on? And so those are some of the questions I think it would be nice to, just kind of reflect on, Francis, if you don't mind.
Well, okay, I'll talk about, I'm not going to go into the Dominic. I think we've all heard enough of that, and quite frankly, he's got away with it, so what's the point? I think he was probably coming from that perspective because he knew he'd be protected by the Prime Minister. Now, how he knew so definitely, absolutely, 100%, whatever happens he would be, I don't really know. That's puzzled me a bit, because, you know, it could have been so bad for Boris that Boris would have to have said, well, you know, I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go, and I can't let this bring the government down or bring me down. However, it didn't get to that. So basically, I would say he was from that kind of elite background. So there's, you see, what I suppose I need to unpick is the fact that this kind of mentality, if you want to call it that, this kind of this white privilege, actually runs through different classes of people. Because it's not just like a white elite that would think that. You'll have them across the board in all institutions. It won't be throughout all the institutions, it won't be throughout all the police, but it will be part of the people that would be in the police or any other institution would think like that. You can get very, very poor people in this country, and I'm sure America, that would see themselves as a much higher status, a much more valuable person. So it doesn't really run on class or wealth. I don't think it's a psyche. It's a what would you call it? It's some sort of inherent belief, and that's what that police officer had. I doubt he was part of an elite part of the society, because they're not going to be extremely rich people. They're not going to be poor, and he was on the front line. He was on an operations role. So, but he had that mentality, and I think it's that mentality that made him not bother about why he was being filmed, because he'd say, well, what the hell? This guy, he's a black guy, he's worthless, and I don't care who's filming me, because I'm right, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the heart of it, doesn't it? The inherent belief in this superiority. And you're right, I don't think white privilege has anything to do necessarily with status or wealth. I think it's something that prioritizes whiteness. It says whiteness is, white is right kind of thing, and anything other than white is inferior. So I think you're right in that sense, that certainly I don't think it's anything to do with class and status or wealth in that sense. So it's an inherent belief in superiority, or mindsets that people have. So if that's the case, if that is indeed the case, that there is a kind of a belief system that's going on, the question then for me becomes, well, how do you start to shift those beliefs? What are the things, if we really truly want to have a society that's different to the one we have now, where people can actually go around killing others? And to be honest, Francis, part of my anxiety, and I think listening to some of the people in the UK who've been commenting on it, is also a view that, well, this is, we're desensitized to it. We see this all the time. This is typical. We're not seeing anything we haven't seen before. And so it's almost as if, yeah, it'll happen. Not necessarily dismissing it and saying we don't want change, but what is the change? What is going to be different? And what will it take for difference to happen? Is this the moment? Because it was so shocking. Is it any more shocking than some of the killings we've seen? But for some reason, this has caught the mood, it's caught the mindset, it's caught what they call the zeitgeist. So is there something that's different this time and is going to contribute to some change? Or is it a blip in time and it's like, something else has come along, and it'll be on the front page for a week or a month, and then in a few weeks it'll disappear again. So I know there's a lot there. What's if it's a belief in superiority, how does it change so that this doesn't happen again?
I think it's people understanding other people, meeting other people. Now, it's quite a common phrase, parallel lives. You might live in one area, even in this country, particularly in a city, and you might have an area that's almost totally white next to an area that's almost totally Asian or black and Asian, and they're alongside each other, and never the twain will necessarily meet. And I think it's got to come from the community. It's got to come from people linking their minds and hearts together and actually understanding, because if you actually get to meet someone that's very different, then you'll completely, I think it's something that the guy last week said, something resonates in my memory about this. You have to actually understand them, meet them, and you'll put yourself not in their shoes, but you can understand better what's going on, if that makes sense. It definitely said something like that, because I remember thinking about that. So it's like you'll see things from their perspective, or you'll be able to a bit more. And how do you shift it? I mean, why hasn't it shifted so far? I mean, with a lot of in America, even, I'm sure there are a lot of people, black lawyers, black doctors. Of course, people will have really good positions in society, and look at, President Obama was the president, but you've still got it there. And I don't quite understand why that is. I don't know. I haven't got the answers, but I think that the only way to break it down is to actually people to meet, people to mingle, people to understand, and there's got to be some mechanisms and processes that can make that happen. Now, I don't know what will happen. This does seem different to me, because it's kind of sparked off incidents all over America and in other parts of the world.
Francis, we've seen it before, haven't we? We've seen, sorry, I don't want to call it rioting, disturbances or disruption, street demonstrations as a result of people dying. We've had it over here in the UK. So we've seen these things happen, and yet they continue to happen. We've seen demonstrations, we've seen Black Lives Matter, and that's had, I don't know what degree of impact it's had, but if you take the killing of another person, the killing of another black man, as an indicator of success, then one would say Black Lives Matter hasn't really had that much of an impact. I don't know. People in America will know differently. So the question then is protesting and demonstrating and forming groups and movements like Black Lives Matter going to make any big difference at the end of the day? So those are one set of questions for us to reflect on. And I guess the other set of questions is your thoughts about parallel lives. And as you were saying it, and I think, yes, certainly getting to know each other and understand each other made me think of, is it Julie Andrews' song, Getting to Know You, Getting to Know All About You? I don't know if it's not Julie Andrews, somebody's song anyway from a film.
Yeah, I know the song, but I don't know
who. I can't think what it is. But anyway, it made me think of that. But yeah, so I guess at the heart of this is, if people got to know each other better, is that the solution? Would we behave differently? Would we show up differently? Would we treat each other differently if we got to know each other? Because that's what it presupposes to me. And I don't know. I'm yet to be convinced. I don't know. I don't know. I'm struggling with that one because I'm not sure whether
Well, it's either that, which is the way that you would hope it could go, or it's either a revolution. There doesn't seem to be anything in between. And you don't know whether this is something that, is it the straw that broke the camel's back, this latest killing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think, let's see what happens. I mean, it seems to me like it's a sore that's been going on a long time, and people have got away with it, and it's happened to other parts of the world as well. And what does it take? That's the problem. It will take a revolution, terrorism, as they would call it, or freedom fighters. If nothing shifts the peaceful way, or the negotiation, or the, you know, let's understand each other, let's set up forums, let's do that. If that hasn't worked and you've got pressure groups going on, then there seems to me the only way is a violent way. And that, I'm just saying that because what else can you do? And I'm not saying that that's what should happen. I'm just saying I don't know what there is in between.
Yeah, and those are very good points. Yeah, because the kind of Gandhi approach with the, you know, non-violent protests and stuff, questionable, because as I said, I don't know the extent to which Black Lives Matter, for example, has made a difference. I mean, what you've had in counter to it is White Lives Matters, and then you've had a rise in some of the kind of white supremacist stuff that's gone on, which says, you know, well, if you've got that group over here, we need to have our own over here. And what it seems to have created is fragmentation. And I guess I was getting back to your point about parallel lives and groups kind of operating in their own space. Now, I'm going to kind of go back a little bit and think back to when I was working in social services some years ago. And I remember setting up a group, and we organized the group around different identities, for want of a better term. So we had a group for disabled people, physical disabilities. We had a group for mental health survivors, as they call themselves. So people who had experienced, you know, schizophrenia or were on some form of mental health support. We had a group for people with a learning disability, and we had a group of older people. And it was set up in that way, partly as a recognition that different groups experience and see the world differently. Their experiences, you know, they experience their world through the lens of being disabled, physically disabled, being learning disabled, being an older person, being a person who's surviving or experiencing mental health. And those particular experiences, those perspectives were important to kind of come through policy making and decision making and the way services were designed. And so that was back in 1990s, mid 1990s, mid to late 1990s when I was doing that work. And now there's some question marks as to, was that right? Because does that not then create greater fragmentation and, as you said, parallel lives and divisions? But my politics at the time, my thinking at the time was, because each person's perspective is kind of quite unique. I mean, it's like taking my own perspective as a Black woman. And I see and experience the world through the lens of being a Black woman. I can't not, because that's both how I define myself and how others define me, or at least that's my perception of how I think people relate to me. They see me in terms of my color, I think first, and then my gender. That's how I understand and perceive my world. And if that's denied to me, then that undermines my sense of who I am. So I was trying in that piece of work back to the 1990s, in trying to, if you like, assert that positive identity that some people wanted to put forward. But as I think about it now, I think, has that, as I said, reinforced divisions and divisiveness and created parallel lives and communities going down their own paths and stuff. And I don't know which is right. I don't know whether both needs to exist, whether you need to have some space for people to speak their own truths from their own perspectives as, you know, a woman or a person with mental health problems or whatever it is. I don't know whether people need to have their own space to do that, or whether it should always be about a shared identity. And what would that shared identity therefore be, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the groups were set up as like pressure groups because things weren't right for that group. And so disabled people, people with disabilities, people with special needs, all sorts of people, Black people, Asian people, whatever. You know, often groups are set up because they feel that something needs to change and that perhaps they haven't got the same life chances or same opportunities as other people. But then there is the, as you say, the space where actually we want to talk together because we understand our issues probably more than other people, not to preclude them for any other thing, that actually, just like maybe women might want to sit and talk together, and men might want to sit and talk together, and not that they don't like talking to men or women, but it's just something that we kind of relate to each other better in we need that kind of space. But then also I think there's another question about diversity within diversity. I mean, can we possibly assume that all women, of course not, or Black women, or all Asian women, or all white women or men are the same? So we've got to act, we haven't even got that far that we can say, the Black people in America say, well, what do you mean by that? Are they going to be the same? Of course they're not. They're going to have different political views. They're going to have different values. They're going to be from different walks of life. So when we're looking at diversity, there's diversity within diversity within diversity. But it seems that maybe we need to get the general diversity more equitable. And then because once you dig deep, everyone is so very unique. So I haven't got the answer about it. I don't know. It seems to me that, going back to this point about what will happen, I don't know. Is it the straw that broke the camel's back? Will it trigger some more positive talks across America with different groups, and listening to what people say, processes to make people meet? Or will it just be this gets worse and worse and it's a full-scale revolution? I don't know. I don't know, because there doesn't seem to be anything in between. And maybe that's something in between that we haven't quite defined is what maybe is the next stage, rather than tip over into a full-scale revolution.
Okay, so we've got revolution on the one hand, and what's the other end of your scale?
Well, it would be what's been going on so far. Some pressure groups, some talks, some forums that may or may not have maybe they have made some difference, but they certainly haven't stopped that George, him dying. The same psych enabled that to happen as what happened before and before and before. So that hasn't changed, no matter what these groups might have done.
Okay, let's have a think about if we were to come up with something, and it's no easy answer, as you say, between revolution and protest groups and movements, social movements trying to get change, peaceful or otherwise. What are the other things that could happen? What are the other things that we could reasonably start to think about happening? One of the things for me is there some way of building, and I don't know if shared identity is the word or the phrase, but is there something here about having a greater sense of we-ness, we-togetherness, if you like, that people, because I don't believe that, and maybe I'm wrong, but if this cop had a sense of we together, would he have been able to do what he did to another human being?
No.
Exactly. I don't think, if you have this sense of we-ness, and I don't know what other word to call it yet, so I'm just going to call it we-ness. If we had a sense of we-ness, what would that look like? Because surely that would make me stop and think, oh, if I harm somebody else, how does that reflect back on me? How does that impact us collectively as a society? So when you start to think of we, you start to think of all of us, and then my actions, I need to start questioning my actions. It strikes me as something quite different then. But I don't know how you get to we-ness. I really don't. I don't know where that first step starts. And maybe that's something, and we're just, brainstorming and exploring here. And whoever watches this and listens afterwards can hopefully join in and share their views. But yeah, what would you think? What would you think it would take to move from, or to sit in the space of revolution on the one hand and social groups and social movements on the other hand?
Well, there's obviously something missing in like the social groups and the pressure groups or whatever. So obviously something that needs to be in place are certain legislations. Maybe they're there and they're broken, obviously. So, but there are policies, legislations that need to be made, made and discussed together with the people that are probably most badly affected by when they're not there. So like policy making with people involved. Now, I don't know all the rules and policies and in America, but I'm sure, I mean, obviously homicide is against the law, obviously, for anyone, but I don't know, what acts they've got, for instance. I mean, it doesn't stop racism in this country, but it has helped the fact that we've got laws. And people, it doesn't stop people thinking what they think, obviously, but it does stop people being overt, because they could be pulled up on it. Doesn't mean to say they can't think it, but there are things that will stop people behaving in a certain way. And the fact that it's there to stop you makes people think a little bit more about, well, actually, no, that's not right, is it? And that's why that's in place. Now, I don't know about America, what kind of things they've got in place there, what acts that are missing, that at least it form the nuts and bolts, the framework. It doesn't change the psyche. That's a lot more work. But certain things that could be put in place straight away, in every state. I don't know. I mean, that's just something I'm throwing out. I haven't got the answers.
Legislation is one thing that fills the gap between social movements and pressure groups and outright revolution is one thing. I'm saying there's I don't know what I'd call it, a mindset shift, a consciousness raising, or something that, and maybe it's something under an umbrella of, we need to start talking about a we world or a we society in which we collectively come together and still, but I guess the image I've got is like an umbrella. So it's an umbrella with spokes. So we've got within our umbrella something that we can all be shaded, sheltered, supported under, but there's still scope for recognition of diversity, because I don't think it's good to talk about losing diversity. I don't think that's something we do.
I don't think it's reality to lose diversity anyway, even if, no, I don't think it's a good thing, but we're never going to all be the same, and we don't need to be, do we? But it's about respect, about valuing equal.
Yes, great. So I think if we can think about it, because I'm visual, so I tend to think visually. So an umbrella with spokes, and the spokes are all the differences and the diversity that make us up together collectively. Beyond that, I'm not sure, because yes, we've got legislation and different things. As you say, I don't know. There's years of civil rights legislation in America.
Yeah, but it's not worked, has it? So there must be some things missing.
They've had Martin Luther King, and all those, so they've had massive amounts of legislation and so on, and yet
it doesn't stop it happening. So there's something missing. I mean, it's not the answer, but there must be. That's where the thought perhaps needs to go. Something to do with what you've said, but not those sort of normal legislations, more of a community legislation, more of a, I don't know. I mean, that's just something I've thrown in, because I think you always need to have the backup of the law. And I say that, having said that, who killed the guy? It was a policeman. So, but he wasn't doing his job properly, was he? Because I'm sure that's not what they're supposed to do. But he did, and he got, and nobody who stopped him, and who stopped all the other people before. And so
this is the issue: is when the debate happens as to was he doing his job or not, and was it justifiable, in the way he was doing his job, that those will be part of his defense. I'm assuming that, yes, it was justifiable. Now, I don't know how we can argue it, because there's video evidence to say he wasn't under threat. You know, the guy was already lying prone and handcuffed. Why did you have to have your knee? And you know, the thing that really shocked me more than anything else is, whilst he had his knee on the guy's neck, it looked as if he had his hands in his pockets. You know, almost as if it's like, oh, you know, what's the big deal? You know what I mean? This kind of indifference and an arrogance to it, like, yeah, you know, so what? You know? And I just thought, wow, that speaks volumes, that you've got your knee on the man's neck. He's saying, I can't breathe. And you could hear him gasping. And yet the man was hand in pocket and just, you know, not moving.
So look how far we've got to go. That's the essence of what we're dealing with. Absolutely. That is the essence of it. And
so I long way to go. The other thing, so I think there's something for me then about a rebuilding strategy that needs to happen, that starts with I think for me there's something in all of this about accountability. It seems to me, and whilst I raised Dominic Cummings and stuff earlier, it wasn't necessarily to say he's an elite. It was just to say, oh, how interesting that some people just feel able to do whatever they like because they know they're going to get away with it. They don't have to apologize. So it's not about privilege in that sense. White privilege meaning whiteness, not necessarily status or class, because our world is focused around what we value, and we value whiteness and so on. So that's what I was meaning earlier. So my sense of it is, at the moment, so Trump came on TV, there's a recording of him saying he touched women's genitalia. There's clear evidence that Cummings broke the rules at the time. And there's clear evidence that this guy caused the death of another man, this cop. But the issue then becomes one of accountability, it seems to me, that Trump wasn't held accountable for what he said. Cummings hasn't been held accountable for what he's done. And I'm not convinced at this moment in time anything is going to happen to that police officer. And I'm wondering also whether the protests and what's going on the streets of America is a recognition of, you know, anger and frustration, but a recognition that people aren't convinced anything's going to happen. They've been here before, they've seen it before, and coppers get off. I think, if I've read or heard somewhere, the vast majority of police officers who are prosecuted get off. So there is something here for me about what kind of accountabilities, who are people answerable to? And if they're not answerable, then of course they'll just do what they like, and of course they'll believe I can get away with whatever I want to. So for me, under this we umbrella, there has to be not just responsibility, but accountability. I've got to be answerable for my actions, and you've got to hold me account for my actions, for anything that negatively impacts our we-ness, our collective conscience, if you want. What do you think?
Yeah, oh, of course we have to be accountable for our actions. I just, as you say, will he be accountable for his? I don't know. And yet they have said it was homicide. That's what they've said. So, okay. So, oh, it's all right if a policeman commits homicide. No. Because basically it's murder, isn't it?
Well, it depends on the defense. I think murder has to have something about being premeditated, I think, for it to be classed as murder. And I don't know whether they'll say it was premeditated or whether it was in the spur of the moment, because then it gets me thinking, you know, people start to defend him as either it was in the spur of the moment, and, you know, when you're in a crowd and you lose it, and and all that kind of nonsense, or whether he's just one bad cop. It's not like that for all cops are really good. There's always a one bad apple in the bunch, and therefore he's a bad one, so we'll make an example of him. But all of that doesn't seem to me to get away from the fact that we still have a situation where one human being has no compunction, no sense of, this is not the way to act in a supposed civilized society. This is not a way to be. And I can't blame the people who are filming, but I also find that really bizarre that people are recording.
I know. Why didn't they step in? Perhaps, I don't know. I mean, that I don't get.
I don't know if anybody intervened. I mean, because all I've ever seen is the footage of him on the floor.
Yeah.
But I thought, who's recording that, and why are you not doing something? What's going on? Why are you standing there recording it? Seriously. And then you kind of think, well, people are either going to say, oh, I was worried about my own safety. So then you kind of think, oh, right, so this is the nature of that world, that policing culture, that people are so fearful of intervening and helping, or it's the nature of that society that people are so intimidated and worried about intervening that we wouldn't do anything. Would I do something if I saw that happening? I'd like to think I would, but maybe we wouldn't. I don't know. I really don't. I don't know what causes people to think it's okay or it's not okay to intervene.
I'd like to think I would as well, but we'd have to be there at the time to really know, wouldn't we? Would we be scared? Would we find it hard? Maybe when they were recording it, they didn't think he would die, and that it would, but then it must have become increasingly obvious that he was gasping for breath. I don't know. I don't know.
There's something here that, as you say, I mean, on the positive side, there's a record of it. So,
Yeah,
we record it as evidence. So there's recorded evidence. But as I said, on the other hand, I was just like, oh, that seems strange that nobody intervened. But let's kind of carry on thinking about what's the strategy between social pressure groups and revolution. And we started talking about legislation. We talked about, for me, this notion of a kind of a conscious shift to becoming more we inclusive, for want of a better term. Something there that celebrates our togetherness in that way. And once again, I guess, I think, is it, like you said, Francis, is this the straw that breaks the camel's back? Is this the moment when we're all going to say enough is enough and things need to change? And what is it that we need to do together to get the kind of change needed?
And is it, I mean, obviously this is the issue at the moment in America, because there's a lot going on in America since this has happened. But is it then because it's only in America and everywhere else is all right? No, of course not. It's not all right here all the time. It's not as bad as there, but I would say that, I'm a white person. I don't think it is. But what about other parts of the world where there's oppressed people? Now, I think this world, or this shared identityness should happen in many, many places, amongst countries where there sort of conflicts within the countries, where people don't understand each other. Would that help? Because you've got situations in other parts of the world where there's groups going on that are continually fighting, bombs are being put, and then you think, well, if they didn't do that, nothing would change. And unfortunately, sometimes that is the truth. That is the case. But people die in the meantime. Why does that have to happen? Isn't there some middle way that's not too softly and negotiable? Because actually that doesn't always work. But no, I think should it be a world movement? Because let's face it, like COVID-19, It's something that's kind of happened to everyone all over the world. There's not happened in one country, and that's something, terrible as it is. The only positive thing you can think about it is that it made us all think together as one world to some degree. You know, everyone was sharing the same enemy. It's almost like if, I've always thought this, what happens if someone from another planet decided to invade Earth? Surely all the citizens of the world would rise up together, because we're all human beings. And maybe these other people were, you know, different from a different place that wanted to dominate us. Then we would join together. On a lesser scale, you could put a sort of an analogy for COVID-19. But I think going back to this shared identity, there must be something there, that something as a bit of a fire to start thinking about, just something. It's a spark of something, you know, something somewhere's got, there's got to be some better way, from a way that doesn't really work, and a way that will inflame and kill lots of innocent people anyway.
So I like the idea of what you were saying about a common spark or something. And you know, I know we've been talking over the last few weeks about whether COVID provided that kind of common spark, that match that lit our sense of who we are, and starting to recognize that it's possible for us to develop a shared sense of identity, for want of a better term. But that seems to be, you know, I've become, because I, like you, I thought, oh great, this is an COVID represents that opportunity. But as things have started to loosen up and to lockdown is easing, I've become a little bit more skeptical, or a little bit more, what's the word? Yeah, skeptical that that's going to ever happen now. That in fact, it's not having that kind of impact that I thought it was. That people are so quick and desperate to get out of lockdown. People are so, yay, you know, the prison doors have opened, we can go out into the world again. That everything that I thought would have happened, that people would have stopped and thought about, what did we gain? What did we learn from this? What did we notice and want to do differently? What was it like to be collectively together in this unique situation? What do we want to stop? What do we want to start? What do we want to continue and discontinue as we start to re-emerge in the world? And I'm not, maybe it's too soon, I don't know, maybe it's too soon for that kind of reflection to happen, but I'm not hearing that. We were in the park at the weekend, and you know, the message still was, yes, social distance, and yes, groups of 6, but there were groups of hundreds of people milling and wandering and collectively working together, and everybody had forgotten about lockdown. Everybody in the park had just like, that's it, we're done, we're moving on, you know, we want to be back to normal.
I think there'll be some pockets of change. I think as individuals, a lot of people will think, well, it's not going to change my life dramatically, but actually I am going to continue doing this. A hobby you might have started, or friendliness in the neighborhood. I don't know. For certain individuals, there'll be certain ways, and certainly working practices. I think, you know, when people haven't commuted and haven't gone into the office all the time, things like that, I think will change. But I don't think, you would hope that climate change and the environment and the impact on the environment would change. I don't know, because I don't know, but it might not be revolutionary, but I think there will be small changes. But as you say, by and large, people will probably get back to pretty much what they were doing before, with a few amendments. I don't know. There'll be people that won't, though. There will be people that won't.
Well, we'll see, hopefully over time, whether that happens. So yeah. If we were to start to kind of wrap up and think about where has our conversation taken us, particularly because this was meant to be a reflection on what's happened in the US with the death of poor George Floyd, and whether it represents a moment in time for something new and different to happen. And also, what might the new and different be, and what might that look like? Where do you think we are in our conversation? Do you have some sense of hope?
There's always got to be hope, but I think at the moment we're not much far from zero. So I don't know. I mean, I think we can discuss it, and we have our views on it, obviously, and we'll have different views on it because we've come from different perspectives. Different, like I see the world through the eyes of a white woman, or who looks like white woman anyway, and you as a black woman. Now, but on the other hand, we're not American either, and the experience here is different to there. So for that particular issue, everyone, or is it something that, you know, black people, and not just black people across the world, need to get together and say, well, this isn't right. But
that's an interesting.
How far have we got? It seems like we're still at zero.
I mean, it's interesting you said that about people across the world, because certainly it's this terrible act seems to have prompted some world reaction.
Yeah.
What's interesting, I mean, as I said, I think I said earlier, I was looking at the UK reaction, and there were quite a lot of black people, mainly predominantly younger black people, were interviewed on the news. And combination of experience, sadness and frustration and deep anger and upset, but also, as I said, a kind of, somebody actually used the words, felt desensitized. It's so familiar, it happens so often that they feel desensitized to it. And you know, there's a sadness that goes with that. No one was complacent, you know, it can't happen in the UK, kind of complacent. Because, well, we've seen some instances of young black men being, you know, choked to death in police cells and stuff like that over here. So it's not like it hasn't happened, but it doesn't seem to be. I know, maybe I'm being flippant here. I don't know if it's as regular or as marked as it seems to be in the US. We've had outrage as a result of people dying here, but it feels qualitatively different, I guess, is what I would say. But on the positive side, as you've just said, you know, lots of people around the world seems to have taken this up. And I mean, even those who you might want to, who you'd think would want to get my teeth in, who would want to stay away from what might be seen as a controversial thing. Some, you know, big name people that I've been listening to, who you think would not want to be talking about it, have been talking about it, and seem to be on the side of George Floyd and his supporters, who are saying, you know, this marks a watershed. It's time for some kind of shift and change. And part of it is about having a conversation and recognizing the frustrations that people are having. So there seems to be some mood around. At the moment, I don't know whether I'm just feeling disgruntled, but at the moment I'm not hopeful. Although hope is a good thing, yeah, but I'm not feeling hopeful.
But it can't keep happening, can it? Forever and out. Something's got to change it. And it's, what is that something? Because if it's that unjust, in the end, it will burn itself out and just go up into one big fight. Because injustice can't continue to happen and happen and happen. Something at some point is going to trigger a change. And sometimes it might go on for years. I was reading something about the Aboriginal people also saying that there's far more likelihood they'll be put in cells or arrested or maltreated or not believed. So, I mean, those were the people that were actually from Australia, not all the people that went to live there after. And it doesn't matter who's there first anyway, but it does matter when some other people go and join the land and take it over. That is very questionable, just like what's happened in Palestine. But I'm not going to go into that now. But something's got to change, surely, and there's got to be hope. There has to be hope.
Well, I think that's a positive note to end on, because there has to be hope. So let's certainly hope that this marks a watershed in the way people are perceived, people of color are perceived and treated. That, you know, no one should lose their life in such dreadful, horrendous circumstances, and that this is the, you know, the last time a Black person in any country, in any part of the world, or any minority ethnic, I hate that term, but any person of color loses their lives because of the color of their skin. So let's hope.
Absolutely.
Thank you, my dear. So it's been enjoyable as always.
I don't know what we've resolved, but we've started to chew over the beginnings of a conversation that needs to spread a lot wider.
Absolutely. So maybe that's something we kind of come back to another time, and invite some others to engage with us in the conversation. But thank you for joining me, and as always, really appreciate it. All right, my dear. So see you soon. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care. Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye.